Welcome to Combining Culinary Cultures, a program of Discover Nikkei. To get us started, I would like now to introduce Rick Noguchi, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the Japanese American National Museum, who's going to be saying a few words to welcome us to this program. So thank you so much, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Rick.
Thank you, Joy, and thank you all for joining us for today's Combining Culinary Cultures program, organized by Discover Nikkei, which is JANM's community-based international project that explores the experiences of Nikkei communities around the world. So we are excited to present this conversation with three noted chefs, Niki Nakayama of Naka, based in Los Angeles, TELMA Shiraishi of Restaurante Aizomê in Sao Paulo, Roger ARAKAKI of Sushi Ito in Lima, and the program will be moderated by author GIL ASAKAWA. Before we begin, I want to thank the Nippon Foundation for their support of Discover Nikkei and this program. We also want to extend our thanks to our community partners, the Japanese American Cultural and Community Center in Los Angeles, JCI Brazil Japan in Sao Paulo, and the Japanese Peruvian Association in Lima for helping to promote this program today. Additional support was provided by Onigiri Productions in Peru. So onto the program, our MC and moderator for today's program is GIL ASAKAWA, who is a journalist, editor, author, and blogger. He covers Japan, Japanese American and Asian American and Pacific Islander culture and social justice issues on his blog, NikkeiView.com. He also writes a regular column, the Nikkei Voice for Pacific Citizen, which is the newspaper of the Japanese American Citizens League. He is the author of Being Japanese American, and his latest book, Tabemasho, Let's Eat, A History of Japanese Food in America, was published this summer. GIL has been contributing articles to Discover Nikkei since 2009. He moderated Discover Nikkei's last multilingual virtual program about Nikkei food in February and was recently featured in the project's Nima Voices interview series in October. So we are delighted to have GIL moderate this discussion. So without further ado, over to you, GIL.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Yes, I'm very honored to be here in the company of such acclaimed chefs, and being a foodie myself, I'm just flabbergasted. I am amazed that I get to speak to you three, and also, and have an audience to engage with. When I moderated Discover Nikkei's previous multilingual virtual program exploring Nikkei food earlier this year, the conversation afterwards, after the program, that we're going to have a similar conversation today available, many participants expressed interest in a follow-up program. And the folks at Discover Nikkei listened. So here we are. For those of you not already familiar with Discover Nikkei, it is JANM's, the Japanese American National Museum's, international community-based web project with major funding from the Nippon Foundation. Launched in 2005, its mission is to connect generations and communities by sharing stories and perspectives of Nikkei around the world. And it does an amazing job of creating an online cross-cultural community. I really, I learn a lot every time I go to discovernikkei.org. So the site is available in 4 languages: English, Japanese, Spanish, and Portuguese, with unique Nikkei stories published daily, contributed by organizations and individuals from around the world. This is Discover Nikkei's 3rd virtual multilingual program. We were excited to receive over 280 registrations from 12 countries, actually probably closer to 300 registrations by now, from countries around the world ranging from regions with larger Nikkei populations like the US, Brazil, and Peru, but also places like Argentina, Australia, Bolivia, Canada, Chile, Japan, Mexico, Paraguay, and even Spain. We're all excited to bring together so many people from around the world to listen to these incredible chefs. This really reflects how much interest there is around the world in Japanese cuisine, and especially now how Japanese cuisine has spread around the world and has evolved and adapted. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. The first of the chefs that I'll introduce to you all is TELMA Shiraishi. She's the head chef of Restaurante Aizomê. And Thelma, I meant to ask you earlier, is the correct pronunciation Restaurante Aizomê? I hope it is. Okay. And which crafts Japanese food with... Yes, that is. Yeah, great. With crafts Japanese food with Brazilian and Japanese ingredients, and commands an Aizomê unit at the Japan House São Paulo. Her cuisine is based on a balanced combination between hot and cold recipes with authentically Japanese values, seasonal and local ingredients. Thelma is also in charge of the kitchen at the Japanese consulate in Sao Paulo, where she holds the title of Japanese Cuisine Goodwill Ambassador, which was granted by the Japanese government through the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries. Thelma is the first Brazilian professional and one of the few women in the world to receive the honor. So, wow, it's so great to get to meet you, even if it's over the internet. Roger ARAKAKI graduated from La Union, a school serving the Niki, and all of you, if I mispronounce words, please break right in and correct me, because I definitely bring a Japanese and Japanese American language background. So the school serves the Nikkei community, and he initially enrolled at Universidad Ricardo Palma, and he majored in architecture. We should talk architecture later. I'm a fan of architecture. But later set off in a new direction when he traveled to Japan and stayed there for 9 years, immersing himself in the country's ancient culture and wide-ranging cuisine. Roger is the chef and co-owner of Sushi Ito, a restaurant founded more than 25 years ago in Peru that offers the best offers the best of Japanese and Nikkei cuisine. And if you all could just make sure that you're muted, that would be helpful, I think. He's also a leader in efforts to raise awareness about Japanese and Nikkei cuisine in Peru and throughout the world, traveling to numerous provinces and countries to promote Peruvian Japanese cuisine. In 2021, he was chosen as a bicentennial chef as part of the commemoration of the bicentennial of Peru's independence, and was recognized by the U.S. Senate for his achievements in Peruvian and Nikkei cuisine in East Hampton, New York. And for Niki Nakayama, chef and owner of Naka and Soto, the art of cooking comes down to feeling. Always want to follow her intuition, Nakayama's instincts guide her path as a chef, and it continues to be the driving force behind every dish she creates. And Naka, her highly acclaimed, it's very highly acclaimed, Two Michelin Star restaurant in West Los Angeles, serves as a global destination for modern kaiseki with a California twist, at which Niki serves world-class, artfully curated and exquisite dishes in a progression designed to reflect the mood of the season, time, and place. And she couldn't join us, but Niki's partner in life and in business, in food, is Carole Iida-Nakayama. And Carole is the sous chef at Naka, and where she utilizes her in-depth knowledge of Japanese cooking and highly organizational nature Think you guys must make a great team, because I am definitely not very organizational, but I rely on people who are around me. In March 2021, the two launched En Soto, the second restaurant in the West Adams neighborhood of Los Angeles, as a takeout-only restaurant focusing on bento. It opened its doors in April of this year as an izakaya-inspired Japanese restaurant. So, with sit-down, with seating inside. Translating to outside in Japanese, soto refers both to the pandemic that closed people off from the outside world and the menu's exploration of Japanese cuisine as interpreted throughout Los Angeles. So for today's program, I'll be moderating a conversation with these fantastic chefs. Then we'll have a Q&A, so you all will have an opportunity to ask them your questions. Please be sure to post your questions for them in the Zoom chat in English, Spanish, or Portuguese. You can start posting your questions at any time starting now. Just click on the chat feature down below at the bottom of the screen. The chefs will be speaking in their native languages, so if you haven't already, I recommend that you use the translation feature. Just click on the globe at the bottom of the navigation bar at the bottom of your screen, and then you can choose English, Spanish, or Portuguese, because then you can take advantage of the simultaneous translations that we have available. So let's begin. I'm going to ask a very general question to our chefs here first, which is, how is Nikkei cuisine different from Japanese cuisine? Which one of you would like to answer that first? TELMA? How would you describe Nikkei cuisine as being different from Japanese cuisine?
Well, to me, it's much more a matter of telling my history as a descendant of Japanese immigrants. I am the granddaughter of Japanese immigrants, and it was in the kitchen that I could, or in the cuisine that I could really express myself. I have my Japanese identity, Brazilian identity, and I think it was in the kitchen or in the cuisine that I could really identify myself as a Nikkei. First, I try to understand the recipes and techniques, the basis and principles of Japanese cuisine, and later I felt more confident in order to start using my Brazilianness, because in the beginning it was very difficult. We always have a crisis of identity because people look at us and do not see us as Brazilians. But at the same time, when I went to Japan, I was not recognized as being Japanese. So that was very difficult to handle. But luckily enough, it was in the kitchen that I could really understand what it was to be Nikkei. And to me, this has to do with the roots and the references and getting the Japanese culture that somehow it is there in your DNA, in your subconscious. So I could hear my grandparents, my family speaking about this, and the community that we have here in Brazil. I'm located here in São Paulo. And in Brazil, we have the largest Japanese community out of Japan. So everything started to make sense to me. So it was much more a matter of getting all the bases and the reference and the learning techniques and the learning the recipes. And then I crossed the world to find something that could make sense to me. Because despite everything, I am in Brazil. A different climate, different areas, the ingredients are different. And I had to understand that the Japanese cuisine has to do with seasonality and also valuation of what is local, valuing the best ingredients. So you try to fit this into the principles and philosophy of Japanese culture. So this is what is the basis of my work. So Japanese or Nikkei culture or Japanese cuisine is putting together all of this within your culture and within your boundaries.
Thank you. That's a great explanation. I certainly understand the situation of Nikkei everywhere, Nikkei-jin, to be like, I'm Japanese. I was born in Japan, but I'm very American. I'm Japanese American. And when I go to Japan, and as a Japanese American, I sometimes face racism and stereotypes, the many things that Asians in general face in the United States. But then when I go to Japan, people know immediately that I am not, they know that I'm not Japanese. Even if I think I have a good accent and can speak a little bit, it's the way I dress, the way I walk, the way I look at people when I speak. And they know immediately that I'm American. So it is an interesting cultural line that we have to walk, I think. Roger, how about you? What is how would you define the basic difference between Nikkei cuisine in Peru versus Japanese cuisine? Okay,
Perdón, no estoy escuchando. I'm sorry, I cannot hear him.
there we go.
All right, sorry, I was muted. So how are you? It's a pleasure to be here. I've just heard TELMA, and I really like what she said, and it's true. In my case, I'm also a sensei, and I have a Japanese last name, that is Nataki, and also I have a Peruvian last name that is Tiger. So in my case, we have this mixed race between Japanese and Peruvian. So, as Thelma explained regarding the cultural aspects on how we feel as Nikkei. So, the main difference, I think, that is that the Japanese cuisine is very traditional, and that's what I've been trying to do. So when I entered the gastronomy world in Peru, we realized that we cannot do a kind of food just for the Japanese people that live abroad. So we would just adapt it, that cuisine, to the Peruvian taste. And in that way, we created the fusion of Nikkei food using Japanese techniques mixed with Peruvian techniques and Peruvian ingredients. Present, not just because I'm Peruvian, but we have appropriated of this name of Nikkei. Whenever we say Nikkei food, we immediately think of the Peruvian Japanese food. And it is because we have combined these techniques in a very well balanced. So in this fusion, it may give room for confusion. So we have to be very good at manipulating these techniques and this thing that is quite orthodox, you know?
No, that's very true. Before I ask Nikki the same question, I want to point out that on the discovernikkei.org website, there are articles for each of you, for profile feature stories on Thelma, Roger, and Nikki that are very well written and give your history and your biography and go into some of the things that you, the ways you think about food and cuisine and culture. And so I urge all of you on this call to check out the articles on Discover Nikkei. I'm asking these questions for the purpose of this event, online event, but the articles fill in the story and give some more context. Now, Nikki, I'm kind of in awe of you because being in the U.S., I see how much attention you've received from the mainstream media, from the culinary media, the food world media. You teach a master class, and it's just like, it's cool how much stuff you do and how hard you work. I don't quite understand how you and Carole get all that done, but I found it interesting that in this article on Discover Nikkei, you make the point that in some ways you don't consider what you serve Nikkei cuisine. You call it Japanese American cuisine, and explain a little bit about what that means to you.
I feel like the term Nikkei cuisine has so much reverence especially in South America, because I think there was originally a development that came from South America, and I feel that deserves its own true respect. And I feel that the cuisine that we're doing is heavily Japanese influence, of course. And I always think about this question quite a bit, and have always come to this conclusion that everything outside of Japan is a form of Nikkei or Japanese influenced cuisine, but it's never truly Japanese. Because I think in Japan, there's such a deep reverence for the history and the culture, and so much of it is very embedded. And I think that's something that people can only truly understand, having been raised and brought up in as a part of society in Japan. And I have an incredible respect for that. I also understand that being born and raised in America, I'm very fortunate to have those parts of it be so natural to what I do and what we do at NNAKA. But at the same time, I think to really truly pay respect is to have that distinguished sense of, real Japanese food is truly enjoyed in Japan, where you get to sit in a Japanese environment and really take in all the things that make it what it is. And I think what we're trying to produce outside of Japan is definitely the only thing that we can really export is the philosophy behind it. So with every chef Shiraishi, chef ARAKAKI, we're always, trying to adhere to that sense of time and place, like really what Japanese food is about, and also the respect for ingredients, and also really understanding an ingredient deeply in order to present it in the most natural sense is what Japanese cooking and philosophy and ideas are about. And I think that both chefs have done an amazing job in the countries that they're at, representing that combination of culture between Japan and Peru, or Japan and Brazil. And I think when I think about Nikkei cuisine, I think it's truly a representation of something unique that is outside Japan, but in containing that heart of what Japanese food is. And I think it's such an incredible way to express the culture being outside of Japan while maintaining what we respect about it. So that's how I feel about Nikkei cuisine and Japanese American cuisine.
Okay, no, that I really appreciate that thoughtfulness that you bring to that. I don't know how familiar each of you are with each other's menus, but I was a little curious just looking at menus. How are your menus different from, in Brazil versus in naka, or in Peru? Roger, how is your menu different from the others? And I think you're muted again.
I think the ingredients, says TELMA.
Okay.
Yes, right. The ingredients, for example, are key. We have started our work in the Nikkei world cuisine, and the Japanese that arrived in Peru didn't have the ingredients at the very beginning, so that they worked with the elements they had at hand. For instance, in the familiar Tabemasho, they did it in such a way that was quite different, and so the families they did the haikon, that is using the Japanese radish, and they worked with these ingredients, but since they didn't find some of them, they used Peruvian ingredients as the peppers, the quinoa, the different kinds of rice, and that's how this fusion originated and created a new kind of food that was not so much known back then.
Telma, do you share some of the ingredients, between Peru and Brazil? Does your menu end up being somewhat familiar to somebody from Peru?
I think that the most popular thing was through the sushi.
Right.
I don't know if it's Nakayama-san or SHIRAISHI. Perhaps that's the most popular dish, and that is the one that made the Japanese cuisine well known around the world.
Yes, in Brazil, I think globally, the food that made Japanese food popular was sushi. We conquered, attract the taste. But my work tries to present all the other possibilities, preparations, flavors, because as we know, in Japan, according to different regions and provinces, we have a number of different recipes according to history and traditions. Every city in Japan has a specificity, a typical recipe. And when I understood this, I felt much freer to think locally. How can we do this? It's very important what he said, what Niki said. This is what matters. You take respect, philosophy, and this helped me understand my roots, what I had in my subconscious. And since I was a child, I heard from my parents and grandparents values, things we practice. We really do what we practice, such as motainai. It makes a difference in our work. It's a very old concept,
Yes.
but we do have to discuss this more and more. Responsibility,
Yes.
and it concerns respect towards ingredients. It's about respect. And spirituality, which is embedded in our culture, and this is something we feel strongly when we cook and eat the Japanese way. It's respect and thankfulness, because we know that in a plate there is much more than food. There is a whole chain, those who planted, who harvested, how the food arrived and got to your hands. And
Right.
so when I think about Japanese Brazilian cuisine, we are discussing Nikkei, of course, but Niki does Japanese American, Roger does Japanese Peruvian, and mine is Japanese Brazilian. And what changes is what and how we do it where we are. We have to be here and now. And this is very Japanese as well, this concept.
No.
I can get bamboo shoots here, but it's much better for me. It's much better to work with heart of palm. It's the same texture, the same flavor profile, and I can grill it or broil it, and I can produce a sashimi, etc. I can use with a miso, and I use Brazilian fish, different from Japanese fish, and different from Peruvian fish, and from the ones Niki can use. And so we use a Brazilian vegetable called machixe. Not even Brazilians used to eat it. We produce kimono with that, a preserve. And these are the local interventions that give us our profile, our personality to our work.
I see. And that is one thing that I think people in general around the world think of Japanese food and think one kind of cuisine, and that it's all one thing, it's all one culture. But the reality is that even in Japan, depending on which prefecture, and what ingredients are available, there's a lot of evolution and adjusting and trying different things, so that Japanese food in Japan isn't one monolithic type of dish or cuisine. So I think I used to be kind of a snob about Japanese food in American restaurants, and like it had to be a certain way, or it's like it's fake, it's not real, it's not right, it's not authentic. But the reality is that in Japan, there's lots of room for variations. And so I've become a little bit more open-minded and embrace these kinds of changes. Niki, you've kind of made a career of that, it seems like.
Well, I was just thinking about what you're saying, how you're a snob about a lot of food that doesn't feel Japanese, but I think it all comes down to how the idea of food, or how Japanese people cook, that makes it Japanese. They're very there's an idea in Japanese culture that things have to be done a certain way, and this commitment to making a product really amazing, and to take those steps, and to really care for a product. And then, in regards to your feeling this discontent with these versions of it, it might just stem from the idea that maybe these people who are cooking these Japanese cuisines are skipping those steps in order to just emulate, but not fully produce those products in the way that a Japanese person would.
Right.
So I think those are really important things to consider when people are eating Japanese food. There's great care in the way Japanese people handle food in Japan, and you want to see that same care being handled outside of Japan too. And I think that's where your feeling from that stems from. And one of the things that I always want people to understand when they're dining with us, that care is still something we truly, truly respect and want to honor. And, it might take us forever to figure out how to do one ingredient properly, but those are the things that is so important to the way Japanese food is made. And I feel like what the ingredients that connect the three of us as chefs are those standard ingredients that make Japanese food Japanese: miso, shoyu, dashi, shio, su. Those are all the things that we would utilize, but we also have to understand that, yes, every region in Japan's miso is going to be different. So that miso that we're creating in the places that we're utilizing will also be a little bit different. And that's very representative of what we're doing. And I think the most important thing with Japanese food is always the heart, like the care in the product that we're using and that respect for it. So
that's great. I am looking forward to someday being able to eat or dine at your restaurants, so I can kind of enjoy that care that you put into your food. And I would love to go to Peru and Brazil as well.
Yes.
Thelma, with all of you, you grew up with one foot in one culture, the other foot in another culture. So tell me about, Telma, tell me a little bit about growing up in two cultures. What's a time when you realized that that you're part of two worlds? And was that, did you have to converge them to make it work in your cuisine and your food? Or did you initially try to keep them separate? Come on.
Well, I commented a little bit upon that, commented my identity crisis for a while in my life. But I've owned a restaurant for over 15 years now.
Yeah.
It was a process, and this is quite Japanese, the Do philosophy, the way you are always in a process. You are walking, you are looking for something. It took me about 10 years learning, studying, devoting yourself. Devoting yourself is a crucial part of the process. And then I realized I was able to understand it enough. First of all, as a chef, we try to work this concept to convey a message to our work, to tell our history. You have to be authentic. You have to tell what we are.
Mm-hmm.
There is no way that you cannot be authentic with that. So I could not be 100% Japanese, 100% Japanese, but I had to be something more. I am Nikkei, I'm a Brazilian Japanese. And actually, this is something, a work that I had to do with the cuisine. And this seemed to be more merged in the last few years. And this is how I could really give a sense to this. And this was also very strong, understanding what my ikigai was. Everybody's speaking a lot about ikigai. Western people love getting appropriating about this concept and transform this into a process of self-help. But to me, this was very strong, meaning this ikigai in the kitchen, in the cuisine, and this pathway. And to me, this is it. I think it was really in the last few years that could really merge these two worlds in the cuisine.
Oh, that's your journey has been really, I think, inspirational to learn about. Niki, I know a little bit about being growing up Japanese and American, and then kind of the American like fast food culture, the American pop culture. You grew up in Southern California in that very pop culture environment. So I know that you ended up going to Japan to kind of immerse yourself in cooking traditional style. When did you realize that there are these two worlds that you were part of and what made you decide to try to bring them together?
Well, I think when I was growing up, unlike the way it is now, the selection or the choices in Japanese cuisine was so much more limited.
Really?
So my first experience in Japan, when I ate a very traditional Japanese dinner in Japan, I understood how deep it could be and how amazing the food is. And I think that was one of the reasons why I really gravitated toward trying to have that more be a culture here too. In thinking about having this wonderful cross culture of having Japanese heritage as well as being born and raised in America, I always thought to myself, well, this is great because I can take what I like from Japan and throw away all the things I don't believe in. And then I can take all the wonderful things about America and throw away all the things I don't believe in. And I can put something together that truly makes sense for me. And I think that was a very exciting moment, realizing that, wait, I don't have to be that proper, or wait, I should be a little bit more kinder or have these things that I care about a little bit more deeply and have more patience. So there's all these wonderful things growing up outside of Japan that you can take from the culture that you're in that really helps you find a sense of your true self.
I think that's wonderful. For some reason, it made me think of like I think in America, putting teriyaki sauce on a hamburger is like, this is Japanese, and no, that's not. And digging deeper, I think is important. And you know, I'll eat a teriyaki burger. You know,
it's great.
If McDonald's or around the corner, all these hamburger places, I'll eat those. I don't mind, you know. But I also know that what it is, and I appreciate the other stuff as well. So, Roger, you were so you use the term dekasegi, which is a Portuguese term for Brazilians to go to Japan, right? But you considered yourself dekasegi when you went to Japan?
Yes. Well, I had the opportunity to study at a Japanese Peruvian school and La Uno school, where even though we are in Peru and most of the students at that school had both Japanese last names, I was the mixed one. I was in gay, that fusion, as we previously mentioned. And I considered all this cultural aspect because I was more attached to my Peruvian roots and not so much to the Japanese roots. And then I got into another process, the process of getting to know, travel, and have the opportunity of being or spending some time in Japan, knowing the culture, the cuisine, and the way of doing things. And then another process came when I came back to Lima and I was hired at our Japanese restaurant. And then I realized the impact because I had so little knowledge about the Japanese cuisine. And also we were talking about the Nikkei cuisine. And the idea was to get to know the Japanese cuisine. And little by little, introduce that or present that to the Peruvian public. So it is more commonly known. And I think it was a process. And it had to do with how to present with those dishes, or how do you present that cuisine and having the opportunity to share that knowledge, because I also worked with different colleges and universities in Peru and also in Columbia School for over 20 years, where I have been able to combine different generations, teaching the classic Japanese cuisine, and they complement with their own studies, their own knowledge, bringing in their own origin. So it's been a whole process, a whole learning process, first knowing the cuisine and then sharing it.
That's one thing with all of you. You are teachers. You teach what you know, what you've learned, and what you cook at various levels and in different platforms. And I think that's very important to pass along your knowledge. And so first of all, thank you for doing that. And Roger, I wanted to ask you, because you have mentioned this a couple of times, and I think all three of you have faced challenges as outsiders in what you do. And Roger, I was curious about the challenges you faced, or maybe you didn't face, as mixed race. Were you accepted Like when Telma says, you know, she goes to Japan, they know she's not Japanese. I go to Japan. They know I'm American. They just know. It's like I give off this, I'm American, like very loud or something. Were you accepted as a mixed race, biracial Japanese Peruvian?
Yes, I think that is part of identifying with a process. When we are younger, something we can understand. As I said, I studied in a Japanese school. I was like an outsider, the ugly duckling in the movie, because I was part of the school where everyone were actually Japanese with the Japanese features, and few of us were the ones with the mixed or combined Japanese.
Hmm.
So it was a transition process where I felt not so much identified with being mixed race, but currently I was able to understand things growing up and maturing. And today we are having this conversation. The importance of being Nikkei is a process that we go through and we can feel pride in it, but it is a whole process. I believe that life is about that. There are some stages where we need to understand, but it's a part of a process where you need to identify certain things to have a positive outcome and to pass that on as well.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I'm glad that you were able to overcome any. It doesn't sound like you faced challenges so much, but that you were able to, you know, choose your career and become a preeminent, you know, one of the top people in your field. And it had nothing to do with your being mixed race. Niki, as a woman, and I don't. Yeah, I want to ask this question because of the current culture in the United States. But as a woman, as LGBTQ, did you feel that challenge? Was it more being a woman in this field that you felt that you were pushing against?
I think it's definitely more being a woman in this field that I'm pushing against. I don't think the question of the LGBTQ ever came up because it was never expressed while I was there. Like I never expressed myself in that kind of way. I think I have this super incredible reverence and love for Japanese culture and Japan. And I understand that in my mind, I feel that even what we're doing here is something that is very foreign and perhaps even unknown in Japan. And it's my dream someday to be, that would be so amazing if Japan were ever to invite me to cook something in Japan for Japanese people. And it would be wonderful to see their reaction if they would hate it or enjoy it, or, you know, it would just be so amazing to be able to be acknowledged on some point of being able to do something that's, you know, that they can respect as well. But I feel that I don't know if that day will ever come. But it's just something that I feel that it's very hard for society in general in Japan to accept women doing high level work or doing things that is traditionally, you know, seen as a man's job.
Yeah. I don't know. Naka Roppongi. I could see it. I think that would be really cool. So
I think I'd freak out before that even happened. Like, oh my God, I don't think I could do it. Let's just quit.
That's funny. Telma, how about you? As a woman, you did face some challenges.
Well, Absolutely. It was not a very easy pathway. It was a work that we do little by little, just like a little ant that you grow things gradually. And at the beginning, I was a little bit pissed off because I had to prove more than others. I had to work 1,000 times more than my colleagues that were male, and just to prove a fraction of what I can do. But today, I'm very grateful for that because this is what made me go beyond, study much more, and deliver more. So this is why I think this was the building process I had to go through. So this was my challenge. This has forged me. This is why recognition has a greater value to me. My greatest pride today is to be able to have opened the pathway to many other women, because many women come to my restaurant telling histories of difficulties because they did not find opportunity in different restaurants, especially when we talk about Japanese cuisine. And today, for example, I have most of my staff is composed of women, and they are also leaders in my restaurant. And this is just a matter of opportunity. And this is something that is very positive. And one of the consequences of this recognition is what gave me a great satisfaction. And I think that the fact that we are out of Japan also gave me an opportunity so that even though we are women, have managed to stand out in the market. Because if you are in Japan, where the society is much more structured and layered, for you to get a space is much more difficult than we have got in our own countries. This is why I'm very grateful to be here in Brazil and to have the opportunity to do what I do. And now going back to what Roger said, I also had a phase when I felt like the ugly duck. Most part of my life, I had no contact with Japanese culture at all. Actually, like you, I do not speak Japanese fluently. I study a lot so that I could master all the techniques, and I know the Japanese jargon for cuisine, but I also studied English and Portuguese a little bit because of the traumas of Second World War. Because of the war, immigrants here in Brazil were also persecuted. So my grandparents also went for the positions that they went. So this is why my parents chose to educate me according to the Western culture. So my thought for Japanese culture was a way to recover and to identify myself. And this is where I found my place. So this is why I went after the language, the culture. I strongly study all that because as a person, that made sense to me at that point. And as I said, the philosophy and the culture of Japan and also spirituality, which I think there is very much embedded in that, especially in the process, in the cuisine. I spoke a lot about respect and gratitude, and there is a strong connection with nature. So to me, all of this made sense.
Okay. I have some questions from our audience that I'm going to ask you. Let's see. Here's the first one from Bess. The term fusion food. I don't know if they're using fusion in Latin America, but fusion food has become a popular concept. Do you come to the combination of cuisines naturally, or is it an effort? Do you feel like is it a conscious effort to bring together two cultures, or is it natural for you, for each of you? Niki, how about you?
Well, for us, we're always looking for that one little ingredient, one little flavor profile, something that just really makes it a different experience than traditional. And I feel that that's it's a conscious decision, but sometimes it happens very organically.
Right.
You know, just sometimes we eat something, we create something in the kitchen, and it's like, wouldn't it be amazing if we added this and we realized, oh, that was an influence from another culture's cuisine.
Yeah,
it just happens.
No, that's very true. And we talked a little bit earlier in our conversation about finding ingredients that have the same mouthfeel, or you know, as a Japanese ingredient. There's basically a salsa that was started in Colorado called karami, which is sweet heat, and it was created by Japanese American families in Pueblo, Colorado, in the South. They wanted to make tsukudani, but they didn't have, you know, kombu, wakame, no seaweed. So they used the one thing that had a similar mouthfeel, which was Pueblo chilies, green chilies. And so it has that kind of a slippery mouthfeel, but it adds this heat to the salsa. And karami is a wonderful dish, it's like a bottled condiment. And I love it. And it's, you know, it's something that out of a need because they wanted to make it, but they didn't have the ingredient.
I feel like that's the basis of what Nikkei cuisine is.
Right, absolutely. Roger, how about you? What's do you, for you, is making that fusion? Because like 22 years ago, you wrote about ceviche sushi, and that was a shock to people, the idea of it. Is that something that just naturally comes to your head, or does that have to be a conscious decision to put these, you know, put different elements together?
In Peru, it's a mixed race country. Therefore, its cuisine, it's also mixed race. We not only see the Peruvian and Japanese fusion cuisine, but also French and Peruvian cuisine, or Italian and Peruvian cuisine. And so all these different fusions that have been created over time. And among all of them is the Nikkei cuisine. Yes, as you said, in the year 2000, we created the ceviche sushi, something that was quite innovative at the time when no one dared to do something like that. But somehow we observed this trend. Our public was highly interested in the Japanese cuisine, but with some touches of the Peruvian cuisine. And that's how we started introducing these kind of dishes as the Nikkei ceviche, or in fact, and it is highly in fashion in different parts of the world. It's like burrito. It's like temaki, but it's a kind of a burrito.
Yes.
And or the tacos. Yes, we invented a Nikkei taco. And so the Japanese gastronomy is involved, and the world, in fact, is involved in all these processes of fusion.
Yeah.
This fusion, it's always good as long as it does not become a confusion, you know.
Well, I would have to say that I would love to try your Japanese tacos, or a temaki that's more like a burrito, but it's good because you're making it. If somebody here in Colorado or in the United States, a non-Japanese company just started making that, a franchising fast food place selling that as a fusion concept, that would make me mad because to me that is the definition of appropriation, where people are taking pieces of culture and using it for profit without the respect for the culture, I think. But it's so great that you're doing that, and you're putting together these pieces of cultures that you have grown up with, that you know intimately. So I think that's what's special. TELMA is the idea of fusion. I mean, you have all this respect from the consulate, Japan House. You're totally accepted with the Japanese community in Brazil. So is the idea of fusion something that you are comfortable with? Is it is it a conscious decision to put things together, or does it just kind of come to you?
I think it was a natural process, but during certain stages of my work, I was really purist. But for a number of years, I had to prove that I understood it, that I respected it, and then I was doing that very respectfully. And from over the last years, when I felt confident, I had already proven it. So I felt confident enough to express myself. And so I could work on this concept. Even I could be proud of the Japanese Brazilian cuisine. Even in my restaurant, Aizomê, a few years ago, I was, let's say, the black sheep, because I was a woman, I was not Japanese, and I tried to produce a cuisine that was close to my roots.
Right.
But let me say that Brazilian cuisine in Brazil became popular because Brazilians started to replicate the fashion for Japanese cuisine that was imported from the US, specifically from California. We had a number of restaurants that were very successful, but their sushi included cream cheese, hot rolls, Philadelphia rolls, etc. It didn't make sense to me because all these ingredients, all those recipes have nothing to do with Japan or with Brazil. Neither. So when I started my restaurant, I was sure I was not going to replicate it, but I'm not condemning it because it made popular. It helped overcome prejudice because Brazilians found Japanese flavors were bizarre, raw fish. And so this was the first step. It's the first time Brazilians enter into contact with the the Japanese cooking. So they were willing to taste raw fish, for instance. Today, Japanese cuisine is a success, a global success, but all those years ago, it was hard. And the pop culture helped disseminate and elicit an interest among the younger generation and the older generations alike. But my work was very different. Since the onset, I was against the mainstream. I was not wishing to replicate Japanese cuisine or American Japanese cuisine or fusion something. Well, when you do fusion and you say it's fusion, okay. But the problem is when you produce a recipe that is out of its context, and you don't understand it, and you say it's Japanese or traditional Japanese cuisine.
And it's not.
That's not okay.
Right.
It's okay as long as my references are clear.
Right.
And so I earned respect from Japanese people, both in Japan and from those in Brazil. But this came after I was able to do this work of bringing together Japan and Brazil, because Japanese people are in awe when someone expresses himself or herself genuinely with her or his own style. My restaurants were Japanese, but something else, because I used all those principles with beautiful things we have in Brazil. And as Roger said, one of the important gifts from Japanese immigrants in Brazil is agriculture. We developed a lot of products. Today we have a variety of fruit, vegetables, even fishes in Brazil, poultry, eggs, etc. It's due to a serious work from Japanese immigrants.
Oh, that's interesting.
So this is very rich.
Right.
And so their legacy. And so I have to pay homage to this legacy.
Okay.
Heritage.
That makes total sense. And in terms of, I remember when, and I write about this in my book, the first time my mother, who is Issei from Hokkaido, saw a California roll, she said, "Are wa nan desu ka? Inchiki sushi yo," which means, huh? What is that? That is fake sushi. and because of that, I actually still don't really go out of my way to eat California rolls or a Philadelphia roll or some of those very American things, which you can now find in a lot of, well, I don't know about a lot, but you can find in Japan, mostly where tourists eat. But, it's part of that whole process of culinary culture being adapted and evolving, and sometimes it's appropriated, sometimes it just becomes like, I don't know about Brazil or Peru, but Americans now say karaoke instead of karaoke. And I'm a snob about pronunciation of some Japanese words. I know I can't fix that anymore. It's too late. Americans like California rolls, Philadelphia rolls, and they will always say karaoke. So, I'm going to skip around and ask some individual questions because I want to get as many questions in as possible. Roger, a man in the audience named Gary Idama asks about how Nikkei cuisine affected, maybe Peruvian cuisine. And he says, for example, perhaps Peruvian tiradito has roots in Japanese sashimi?
Yes, definitely.
That's great.
And our ceviche, our most representative dish, used to be prepared in trays where our grandmas caught the fish, marinated in lemon. And I remember at home, it was prepared by 11. They would put the fish on the tray, and by noon or at 1 p.m., you would sit at the table and you would take it straight from the tray on the table, and you would build your own ceviche dish. It was lemon juice, onions, and fish. So the Japanese cuisine being so, I'm sorry, I'm in the kitchen and I apologize for the noise, but what happens with Japanese cuisine is having the most fresh products. So with ceviche, what happens is when it's going to be served, you add lime juice, and that didn't happen before. And with tiradito, it happened the same. It has the nigiri sushi cut, so it's the same. You cut it in the same way. Tiradito was not prepared in that way, so now it has a nigiri sushi cut. So it really has an influence. There's an influence from Japanese cuisine to improve the quality of the products.
Okay, that makes sense. Anna Hiromi has an interesting point, and I explain this to people when I talk about Japanese food as well. Local ingredients is important in Japanese cuisine. And yet a lot of what we in the West think of as traditional Japanese food, Japanese dishes, they were actually either appropriated or taken and then adapted to the Japanese palate. Tempura is probably one of the oldest examples, along with tea and, probably 100 things from China, miso, shoyu as well. But tempura was a Portuguese dish that was introduced into Japan, and now it's become Japanese. Things like curry, very, very Japanese. But I think it's important to remember that, like I said before, in Japan, food has evolved and it gets adapted. And so I really can't continue to be a snob. Let's see. Raquel from Brazil says, Telma, you are an inspiration for all of us. So she says, Anna, I see that the confectionery, pastry shop, sweet bakery has a lot of French influence. So, and that's true in Japanese food. Again, that's a Western kind of a dish. Even, shokupan, the Japanese bread, milk bread, was kind of introduced by the West. And so there is a lot of Western influence in Japanese, what we think of as Japanese cuisine. Anna Hiromi also says that Chef Telma I admire and have as an inspiration, partly due to your story that references leaving the medical college at São Paulo University, the first in Brazil, to after some time dedicating to a professional career with the success and self-identification. Is it possible to share a little bit about your decision to leave medical school and end up, well, then you went into advertising and fashion, correct? And then you kind of make your way into food.
Yes. Well, it was not a decision like an overnight decision. I woke up one morning and said, I want to be a chef. No, it's a pathway, a road. I have always liked to read, to study. I'm a self-taught person. Since I was a child, I read a lot, I tried to learn. And as a daughter and granddaughter of immigrants, we are under a lot of pressure because they say you have to study, go to college, and have a good and career, because it's by studying that you will have a serious profession. You should be a physician, an engineer, or a lawyer. And so I
Sounds
was
like my parents.
to study medicine expectations. But halfway my college, I realized I should not be a doctor. No, not my calling. And so I searched, what should I do? I looked a lot around, a number of ways. I tried a lot of things, and I always cooked as a hobby. It was a strong trend in my family. My grandmother was a great cook. She had a lot of utensils, and some things we didn't see anywhere else. She produced sushi, kimono, different things in her kitchen. It smelled different. She would cook throughout the night for our family. And the other grandmother would never cook. She didn't like it, but she was a very learned person. She wrote a lot, she read a lot, and I should have learned or known her better. And I remember my mother and my grandmother always in the kitchen, and I was there as well. And one grandmother gave me the culture, and the other one gave me the techniques. And so my mother is the #1 reference about kokoro in food, the heart in food.
Yes.
And after trying many different things, well, I tried to be a scientist, I tried advertisement, I tried fashion. And so when I had the opportunity to open a restaurant, I thought, well, it might make sense. And so I started to dive into it. And so I realized I wished to do it seriously. It was not enough to learn recipes or techniques. I had to study. I went very deep into it. Culture, history, spirituality, and everything came together for me after that.
Good.
And
good
so
for you.
in my kitchen, I found my identity. And so I implemented all this from all the phases in my life. I think we are alive to learn what I've learned from medicine, research, fashion, everything. I brought everything together in my work, in technique, in the artistic part, from fashion.
Yes.
I apply everything here. And I always used to say that every stage of my life was always very focused. I mean, I like to go deep into everything. And so it was very hard for me to learn Japanese cuisine because there was no course available. When I started, there was no book. There were no books available. I had to research a lot, even in English. We had literature in English, but not in Portuguese.
But it was not back then. So this is much more better of just passing it on to other people what I had to be what I've learned, because I continue to do with that.
Okay, and that's why you're an inspiration. I think that you have taken the sum of your entire life's journey and put it into what you do today. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms, if you all don't mind. Niki, this is Rosemary N had a question, which is kind of interesting, I think. But I think I know the answer from looking at your menu and some of the things you're known for. She asked, do you think kaiseki can still incorporate Japanese and other cultures like French cuisine too?
The short answer, traditional kaiseki, no way. That's why I feel that we've always gone with the disclaimer that it's a modern kaiseki influenced dinner versus laying claim to it being kaiseki, because I feel that it doesn't represent in the ways that traditional kaiseki does. And I think we've always made a conscious decision knowing that, you know, as much as I love and support and respect tradition, there's also very little room in tradition for women to do beyond things that are outside of tradition. So I think, long answer short, no. Only in traditional kaiseki, no. But in other forms of interpretations of kaiseki, yes.
And naka, yes.
Yes. Not traditional.
I think the fact that you go to such trouble to explain that to people who are dining at naka. You know, as to me, that is very, very laudable. You know, I salute you for that, because you're showing how much respect you have for Japanese culture by just telling people right up front, hey, this is kaiseki. We're going to bring you a bunch of these, you know, these courses that we're designing for you. And no, it's not traditional Japanese kaiseki. So I think that's wonderful.